So an employee probationary period is usually in a contract, and that usually provides for a shorter period of notice at the start of an employment. So for example, it might be in the first 6 months, either the employee or the employer can terminate, say, on 1 week's notice. And after that period, it might be on 4 weeks' notice. But then the other issue is the qualifying period for unfair dismissal. And so employees can only make an unfair dismissal claim when they've been employed for 6 months. So the probationary period and the qualifying period often marry up. There's no strict rule on the required length of a probationary period. However, because the qualifying period is 6 months, an employer shouldn't put in a probationary period that's longer than 6 months. An employer would choose to implement a probationary period just essentially to give it some more flexibility and control at the start of an employment. So an employer might say, they want to employ someone, but it really gives them, say, a 6-month period where they can assess whether that employee is right for the business. And within that time, it's more simple to end that employment arrangement. In terms of dismissing during a probationary period, employers need to know basically that employees have a right to an unfair dismissal claim after 6 months. So regardless of any probationary period, an employee can't make an unfair dismissal claim in the first 6 months. So they've got more flexibility in terms of dismissing. But the other thing is just to know that employees have other rights. So for example, anti-discrimination rights. So whilst you can dismiss if you don't think the employee is a right fit for the business, you can't dismiss for reasons like pregnancy or taking too much sick leave. So the probationary period is a contractual term. So an employer can't extend a probationary period without the employee's agreement. So it'd have to be by agreement. My advice would be, if the employer doesn't think the employee is the right fit for the business, then they should make a decision then, rather than extending the probationary period. And also the employer needs to be very careful. The qualifying period for an unfair dismissal is 6 months regardless of any probationary period. So an employer can fall into a trap where they think they have the ability to dismiss without a reason, but actually the employee is qualified for unfair dismissal protection. So then they can make an unfair dismissal application. So at the end of a probationary period, an employee essentially becomes a permanent employee, which all that really means is that they qualify for the longer period of notice. So it might be that the notice that's required to end their employment goes from 1 week up to, say, 4 weeks. What's more important is if that probationary period is for 6 months, then at the end of that period, they qualify for unfair dismissal protection. So if an employer is going to end their employment, they're going to need to follow a more rigorous process.